Let's begin with our top story coming out of India, where police have arrested 3 hardline Bharatiya Janata Party workers for attacking a church in the state of West Bengal. A group of 8 men shouting party slogans hurled explosives at the church and vandalized it as worshippers attended prayer services. India is facing criticism from the international community over the mistreatment of minorities by Hindu nationalists. Meanwhile, police in Delhi used facial recognition software to screen crowds at protests against the citizenship law. Rights groups have condemned that move and said the use of the system for surveillance at public congregations is illegal. Well, 100 Indian organizations, mostly rights groups, have decided to fight the controversial Citizenship Act under one banner. The We the People movement has asked protesters to hold demonstrations under the same banner. Rights activist Yogendra Yadav, Harsh Mendar, student leader Kanhaiya Kumar, and Omar Khalid are among the organizers. Yadav says central and state governments are repressing the voice of citizens opposing the law. He said the banner will start a month-long protests across the country from January the 3rd. 27 people have died in demonstrations across India against the new law discriminatory to Muslim minorities. Kerala Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan has moved a resolution against the controversial Citizenship Act in the State Assembly. Criticizing the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party, Vijayan said the central government is trying to divide Indians along communal lines. The Chief Minister said Kerala's tradition is of inclusivity, and this assembly needs to maintain it. He said this new law is a violation of the fundamental right of equality as guaranteed by the Constitution of India. The Chief Minister earlier said the Citizenship Act will have no place in Kerala, and the state will not implement it. He also said no detention centers will be built in the area. On to the U.S. now, which says it has shown restraint against Iran, but the killing of an American citizen by the Hezbollah brigade in Iraq crossed a red line. Earlier, an American contractor in Kirkuk was killed in a rocket attack by an allegedly Iranian-backed militia. The U.S. State Department's Special Representative Brian Hook said Tehran should not confuse Washington's restraint for weakness. He said it is important for President Trump to order armed forces to respond in a way that Iran will understand. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the assault on the Hezbollah brigade was a defensive action to deter Iran. Well, Iraq has warned Washington's airstrikes in the country will have serious consequences. On Sunday, the U.S. air raids hit a pro-Iranian militia in Iraq and Syria, killing at least 25 fighters. In a statement, the Prime Minister's office said that attack on Iraqi armed forces is an unacceptable and vicious assault. Iraq's National Security Council said the targeting of the country's paramilitary groups will force it to reconsider its relationship with Washington. In a statement, it said the attacks violate Iraq's sovereignty. The leading nationalist cleric, Muqtada al-Sadr, said he is willing to work with Iranian-backed militias to end the U.S. military presence in Iraq. The U.S. Assistant Secretary of State, David Schenke, says Washington is not, though, looking to escalate its conflict with Iran. Elsewhere, Sudan has said it will send troops to West Darfur and suspend peace talks with rebel groups for 24 hours. Government officials say the pause is in response to an outbreak of violence around the regional capital. In a statement, Sudan's Sovereign Council said the armed forces and security bodies will contain the situation. The Information Ministry said the head of the Transitional Ruling Council plus the Prime Minister will visit West Darfur. It said aircraft will evacuate the wounded to the capital, Khartoum. Violence flared in the regional capital, Al-Fashir, after a Rapid Support Forces soldier was stabbed to death with 2 of his relatives. The Arab League will hold an emergency meeting today to discuss the situation in war-torn Libya. Egypt called for the meeting after Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced he would send troops to Libya. President Erdogan said Turkey may deploy troops as soon as next month at the request of the UN-backed Government of National Accord. Libya has been locked in a civil war, splitting power between two rival groups, the GNA in Tripoli and Khalifa Haftar's Libyan National Army in the east. Also in Africa, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, militants have killed 23 people in a fresh attack in the troubled region of Beni. Beni Administrator Donat Kibwana said there was an invasion in Apatina Sana by the Allied Democratic Forces militia. ADF fighters have killed more than 200 people since the army launched an offensive against them on the 30th of October. In Beni, civilians have demanded the DRC's armed forces do more to protect civilian lives and property. The ADF has been present in Congo since 1995 and is accused of killing thousands of civilians over the last 5 years. France is to deploy 100,000 police officers to protect the country's New Year's Eve celebrations. Interior Minister Christophe Castanet said the police will be reinforced by soldiers and firefighters. Castanet said France is on high alert with an elevated terrorist threat. Tourism has picked up after a slump in 2016, with visitors to the Eiffel Tower brushing off security worries. The Christmas and New Year holidays are peak tourist season in France. This year, visitor numbers are down after a 4-week-old transport strike over pension reforms. In other news, in Peru, a state of emergency has been declared in that country's north after strong floods damaged homes, overturned vehicles, and inundated streets. Regions such as Cajamarca, Huora, and Hancayao have seen property destroyed and roads blocked. Officials are surveying the damage to determine the number of affected residents and damaged homes. Peru has been battered by heavy rains in recent weeks. In Australia, 4,000 people are trapped on a beach in the southeastern town of Malakuta after fleeing from a massive bushfire. Elsewhere, 2 more people have been killed in New South Wales, pushing the death toll to 12. Rescue officials say the bodies of 2 men believed to be a father and son were found in the town of Corbargo. In Malakuta, officials say thousands were forced to stay on the beach while some boarded small boats under red skies. Authorities have asked residents and tourists to stay put because evacuation is dangerous. Temperatures have topped 40 degrees Celsius with strong winds triggering over 200 new fires over the last day. More than a dozen emergency-level blazes span a 500-kilometer stretch from New South Wales to Victoria. Australia is home to some of the most venomous snake species on the planet, but the bushfires sweeping across the country are decimating their numbers. One reptile expert warns this phenomenon poses an existential threat to local wildlife.
The wildfires plaguing Australia have kept reptile expert Neville Burns very busy. Snakes fleeing the fire take refuge in people's homes, prompting terrified Aussies to call Burns to take them away. Until earlier this month, he would get 4 or 5 calls a day.
A lot of the snakes will be killed, but those that survive are forced to look for water and food. So they have to leave the burnt areas and they come up into the backyards and onto lawns and that sort of thing. We've got water bowls all around the house outside on the property just for the animals and birds.
Burns fears the ongoing bushfires could have an irreversible impact on the local snake population.
I see that there's going to be a huge destruction of the population of reptiles in the area, and that applies to birds, mammals, everything. I think the damage is going to be seen for years. We've never had a mega fire as big as the ones here. We've never had the combination of so much fuel on the ground and no rain.
Snakes play an essential role in the ecosystem by keeping down the numbers of their prey animals. They are also preyed on by other, bigger predators who would struggle to survive if snakes go extinct. There is no conclusive data on the Australian wildfires' impact on local wildlife just yet.
The news continues after this break. Stay tuned. Begin this segment of the Bulletin in India, where the use of facial recognition software at Prime Minister Narendra Modi's rally in New Delhi has sparked privacy fears. Police used facial recognition software to screen the crowds, a first for the country. An Indian digital advocacy group, Internet Freedom Foundation, said the use of system surveillance at public gatherings is illegal. The foundation said the software was originally developed to find missing children, but police are using it for mass scrutiny. It said this step directly impairs the rights of citizens of assembly, speech, and political participation. Earlier, technology site Comparitech ranked Delhi among the world's top 20 surveyed cities. Elsewhere in the Philippines, the death toll from Typhoon Phanphone has risen to 50, while 5 people remain missing. The storm left the country on Saturday after battering Central Visayas, with officials continuing to assess the damage. Emergency services said the typhoon has affected more than 2 million people, with 80,000 still in temporary shelters. They said 143 people were injured and over 378,000 homes damaged. The government estimates the damage to agriculture and infrastructure to be worth $21 million. It was the year's 21st typhoon to hit the Southeast Asian country, with winds gusting at 150 kilometers per hour. Well, 2019 was a consequential year in several areas. Many events took place that could shape the world in the coming decade. These included the rise of Islamophobic terrorism, government ousters by angry protesters, and India's escalation on the line of control.
Terrorism emerged as a threat to people everywhere once again in 2019. The Easter Sunday bombings in Sri Lanka, conducted by ISIS, were the deadliest terrorist incident of the year. 259 people were killed and over 500 injured in separate bomb blasts in 3 churches and 3 hotels. In New Zealand, the Christchurch terror attack revealed the dangers of unbridled Islamophobia. 51 people were shot dead at the Al Noor Mosque and Linwood Islamic Centre by a white supremacist Australian national. The heinous attack was live-streamed on Facebook. In occupied Kashmir, India illegally revoked the valley's special status as a disputed territory on the 5th of August. To force the local population into compliance with the move, New Delhi shut down communications and put the valley under curfew. The lockdown has been in effect since 5th of August and thousands of Kashmiris have been arrested. People across the world also rose up against government corruption and oppression. There were violent protests in Hong Kong against a now revoked extradition bill that remains ongoing today. Similar protests were also held in Sudan, Lebanon, Bolivia and Iraq. In Lebanon and Sudan, the protesters successfully ousted their heads of state. The worrying symptoms of climate crisis also became more apparent than ever. Massive heat waves killed over 180 people in India and over 160 in Japan. Changing weather patterns were also blamed for typhoons in Africa, Japan and China. The worst was Cyclone Idai in southeastern Africa, which killed over 1,000 people and caused damages worth over $2 billion. In a major setback in the fight against climate change, almost 100,000 hectares of Amazon rainforest in Brazil were destroyed in wildfires that started in January and remain ongoing today. Wildfires also caused significant damage in the US, Indonesia and Australia. These were some of the biggest events of the year and are likely to have major consequences for the next decade.
Well, there was also little improvement in the lives of those living in conflict zones in 2019, be it Afghanistan, Ukraine, Libya, Yemen, or the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Sahel region in Africa. Thousands lost their lives in armed conflicts. The situation was no different in the Middle East, with over 1,000 people killed in Syria's Idlib. Israel continued its blockade of the Gaza Strip in Palestine, killing over 200 people and wounding about 6,000. This report now has more on violence in 2019.
There were some moments this year when warring parties in several armed conflicts were close to reaching a truce. But such a development didn't come to pass. The United States and the Taliban were on the cusp of a landmark ceasefire deal in Afghanistan. But US President Donald Trump abruptly called off talks in September after the killing of a US soldier in the war-torn country. The two sides are now negotiating to find a political settlement in Afghanistan once more. In March, US President Donald Trump declared victory against ISIS militants in Syria. 5 months later, Turkey launched a military operation against the Syrian Democratic Forces, which was a US ally in the fight against ISIS. The operation was halted after Turkey made 2 separate accords with the US and Russia. But the bloodshed in Syria continues as Russian and the government forces intensified bombardment in Idlib, forcing tens of thousands to flee the region. The 5-year-long conflict between the Houthi rebels and the government coalition forces in Yemen continue to make headlines throughout the year. Diplomatic efforts are underway for a ceasefire deal to end the war, which has been described by the UN as the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Tensions around the Persian Gulf remained heightened due to a series of attacks on naval vessels in the key shipping route. In North Africa, Libya is still struggling to find peace 8 years after the fall of a longtime dictator, Muammar al-Gaddafi, in 2011. The situation went from bad to worse after warlord Khalifa Haftar's forces waged an offensive against the UN-recognized government over control of Tripoli. In Africa's Sahel region, increasing attacks and the collaboration between armed groups caused hundreds of deaths and forced thousands to seek safety in the camps. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, militant attacks hampered efforts to tackle an ongoing Ebola outbreak. Aid workers struggled to contain the catastrophe as they and their camps came under repeated militant attacks. Over 2,200 people have died in the Ebola epidemic. Nearly 2 billion people live in fragile conflict zones across the world, driving more than 80% of the world's humanitarian needs. More efforts are needed to improve the lives of the people and to make the world more peaceful.
Let's get to some business news now. Moscow and Kiev have signed a 5-year agreement to safeguard the transit of Russian gas to Europe through Ukraine. Under the new deal, Kiev will collect over $7 billion in gas transit fees by 2024. Ukraine's gas company, Naftogaz, will transmit 65 billion cubic meters of Russian gas in 2020. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Europe knows Kiev will not fail in energy security. Moscow and Kiev had been pushing to reach a new accord because the current agreement ends today. Stock markets in Asia, meanwhile, are trading mixed in the year-end trading, with most major stock markets closed. Investors are striking a cautionary tone as optimism over trade between the U.S. and China is gradually giving way to 2020's uncertainty. The Shanghai Composite is trading fractionally higher on upbeat manufacturing data. Hong Kong's Hang Seng is trading nearly 0.5% lower, with shares of Chinese tech giants Tencent and Alibaba falling over 1.5%. International oil prices have retreated to trade marginally lower. Time now to find out what the weather is like around the world. And with that, you're all caught up. Thank you for watching this bulletin here at Indus.